you have an exam coming up and a lot of material to study in very little time? Are you falling behind on your study plan? Huh? No, I would never. Well, you better pay attention because this study method that I'm about to show you could save your ass. Hey and welcome back to my channel. My name is Anna and I'm a German mechanical engineer based in Sweden. I have a bachelor and master's degree in mechanical engineering as well as a master's degree in entrepreneurship and innovation management, which basically means that I have taken and passed a load of exams. So this study method that I'm about to explain works best for long-term studying, but it has also worked wonders for me to, say, learn 600 slides of production methods in 2 days. I'm not promising any results here, this is just what worked for me. Of course, you should always ideally be studying weeks or even months in advance so that everything can go into your long-term memory. But sometimes you just can't be bothered, or you have too much else going on, or you procrastinate until it's too late. I would never do that. Either way, that's fine. We're not judging here. I got you covered. Pretty much every study method should consist of 2 steps. First, you want to prepare the study material, and then second, you want to study that material. Now, the step that gives me the most value, the most assurance that I'm gonna pass the exam is of course the second step, practicing the material. Therefore, we want to minimize the time spent on preparing the study material so that we have more time for reviewing the material. So let's start with the first step, preparation. Now, whenever I can, I do this step already during my lectures. So from my very first lecture to the last lecture, I will be using the lecture time to prepare my study material so that I don't have to do that later. But obviously, if your exam is coming up and you didn't already do this throughout the semester, then you have no choice but to do this now. But I recommend that from now on, you build the habit of already preparing your study materials during your lectures, because this is gonna be a game changer of how much or little time you need to spend on studying and how well you'll do on your exams. Usually I use the app Anki or Anki, not sure how to pronounce it, for this study method, which I highly recommend. Like, if you can, you should really do it with that app because it will just speed things up so much, and you can download it for free onto your computer. But I don't have Anki on this computer right now, and I want to make this as accessible as possible, so we're just gonna use Keynote. You can also use PowerPoint or Google Slides or pen and paper if you want, but I don't recommend that because that just takes too much time. So let's open up the lecture slides in whatever form we have. I just created these fake lecture slides and then on the other half of the screen we're gonna open a fresh presentation, which is gonna become our study slides. I already prepared some slides here beforehand, but I'm gonna explain all of that as we go. You can start out with a completely blank presentation. From the first second of the lecture to the last, for everything the professor says or shows, we're gonna ask ourselves, how could this piece of knowledge be asked in the exam? And then we're gonna formulate a question based on that. So we're gonna pretend that we're taking a class called Battery Production 101, and let's look at the table of content. Maybe there's already something here, and indeed I think the first question we should ask is, what are the 3 main steps of the battery production process? So what I'm gonna do here in the presentation is I'm gonna create a new question slide. So I made this kind of section for new questions. So under this section we're gonna put all of our questions, and so I just sort of dragged these underneath there so that we can close any of the sections that we want later on, and we can also close the answer. So here, this is where our question is gonna be. What are the 3 main steps of the battery production process? Okay, and now we're gonna make an answer slide, and that's gonna be very quick. We're just gonna screenshot this because why would we write it down if we can make it way quicker? And you really don't need to center this or anything. Or even resize it. This is just about quickly getting the answer on the slide, because especially if we're doing this during the lecture, we don't want to lose any time and miss important points that the professor is saying. So we just need to make this quick. Don't bother with anything fancy, anything that takes too much time. Let's move on to the next slide. We have here the first part of the battery production process, which is electrode production. And there's a lot of questions here that I can think of. For example, what are the different steps of electrode production? That's an obvious question. And again, to answer this, I'm just gonna screenshot this and paste it right here. Now I'm just quickly gonna duplicate this a couple of times so we have more question slides. And I recommend that you just have a sort of template. If you're not doing this in Anki, if you're doing this actually in PowerPoint, Keynote, Google Slides, whatever, then you should have like a presentation template for these questions so that you don't have to create them during the lecture and you don't lose time there. Now looking at the slide, there's a lot more information that we haven't captured yet in questions. So what other questions could be asked in the exam? Maybe something like, what equipment is used for the mixing process? And actually what I'm gonna do here is just paste it again. Just gonna paste this whole slide again. Now, if you're concerned about having too much information on the answer slides, it actually has been proven to help you retain information if there's additional information given. Like, you don't want to overload yourself in the question, that should be super simple, but then in the answer, it's fine if there's extra information that you get along with your answer, because it's gonna help you remember it better. Like if there's pictures on it, or if there's just other interesting facts, or like here, if you're gonna be able to visualize, okay, this is the first step of the process, so you can have this kind of mental picture of it in your mind, and this can help you retain that information later. So I would not be concerned at all with putting too much information on the answer slides. And if you find later on that this is actually distracting you, then you can always adjust the slides later. Now let's move on maybe to the cell assembly process, which is the second main step of battery production. And here we're just gonna say, okay, what kind of question could there be? Maybe like draw a sketch of the calendering process. And maybe this time we do actually just want to have a picture. Let's quickly copy that answer. Right. So you get the idea, I think, of how this process works. And if there's anything the professor says during the lecture that's not in the slides, be sure to write that down and prioritize that, because you could always look back on the lecture slides and come up with additional questions, but you cannot recall what the professor said later on, probably. So make sure to catch all of these little hints that they give at exams. And if there's like other random questions that you can think of, put them all in there. Now, if you don't have the lecture slides during the lecture, I recommend that you write down the questions and add screenshots later. The same goes for if the professor is speaking really fast. I would prioritize to write down the questions and maybe the things that your professor mentions if they're not recorded in the slides. Figure out how this process works best for you, but I would just aim to do as much of the preparation as possible during your lectures already, so that you have to do as little as possible afterwards before you can start studying. And one really important note on questions that you formulate, this may be a bit counterintuitive, but they should be as simple and quick to answer as possible. Not easy, but simple. So if you have a complicated question, you need to break it down as much as possible into sub-questions. So what I mean by that, for example, is that I wouldn't ask, explain the battery production process from start to finish. I would break this down into as many questions as possible without losing any of the knowledge. So for example, I would then ask, what are the main steps of the battery production process? What are the steps of the cell assembly process? What is the stacking process? And of course, do that for every single main process and sub-process of the battery production process. And the reason for this is that otherwise it will make the whole studying process pretty impossible. Like if you're gonna have to answer for 5 minutes and explain the battery production process, how are you gonna check yourself afterwards if you actually did manage to do it right or not? It should be like really like this question, like when you're studying, should be like, question 1, okay, this is the answer, this was correct. Question 2, this is the answer, that was incorrect, okay, repeat this one later. Question 3, this is the answer, correct. You know, it should not be like, question, okay, answer forever. This was kind of a little bit correct, I don't know. Yeah, no, we don't do that. We don't do that kind of stuff. If you notice that some of your questions are still too big, they take too long to answer, you can always break them down even more into several smaller questions. Now that we have our study slides, let's move on to the second step, studying. Okay, we can now maximize the window because we no longer need the lecture slides. First of all, let me explain why I have all of these blue subsections. So we have the first section, which is new questions. So this is where you're just gonna put all of your new questions that you've never tried to answer before. And then we're gonna make some subcategories. And the idea with those is that we want to spend as little time as possible to recall the things that we already know or that come easily to us. And we want to have a lot of time, a lot of repetition for the things that don't come so easy to us. Ideally, if you're doing this as a long-term study method, you would use something called spaced repetition. It's basically a study strategy where you try to recall information just before you would forget it. Let's say you learn this really new fact, like the battery production process has 3 main steps, and this is very difficult for you to remember at first. You would practice it on the first day until you remember it, and then you would say, okay, I should probably repeat this one again tomorrow because by the day after tomorrow I'm gonna have forgotten that. And then the second time around you're gonna be able to remember it even longer, and then maybe you'll schedule the next one a week later, and then the next one 2 weeks or a month later, and so on. So you're training yourself to remember information in longer and longer intervals. But if your exam is tomorrow or next week, this doesn't really work because you don't have the time for it to go into your long-term memory. So we're gonna use this system just a little bit more on steroids. We're just gonna do like really short intervals. So we're gonna set up some categories here. I have the hard category. This is something that I still find very hard. Then medium, you know, something is a little bit hard, like it doesn't come super easy to you. And then we have 3 easy categories. And then finally we end up with done, meaning that we have done that question, we are not going to study it again. And so we're going to move the questions slowly down from new questions to hard, medium, easy, and so on until they're done. So let's do an example here. First question: what are the 3 main steps of the battery production process? And now you're gonna say the answer. I'm gonna be like, okay, that's electrode production, cell assembly, and formation and aging. That was super easy for me because I work with that every single day. So we are gonna put that into the easy category. Now, I don't put it all the way down because I like to make sure for everything that I have reviewed it at least 3 times, which is why I have 3 easy categories, but you can do whatever you want, whatever works for you. But so then I would go through the other questions, and yeah, we don't have so many questions. But that's fine, I'll just delete these. So, next question: what are the different steps of the electrode production process? And yeah, I'm just gonna say I got those, but that was a little bit more difficult to recall. This is something that you should judge for yourself. It's obviously subjective, but I'm gonna say I better review this a few more times. So I'm gonna put this into the medium category. Now let's go through the last 2 questions. What equipment is used for the mixing process? I don't remember this at all, so I'm gonna have to look at it, and then I see it's a vacuum planetary mixer. Okay, now because I did not recall this at all, I am not gonna move it to a new category, but I'm just gonna move it, that was not what I wanted to do. I'm just gonna move it to the end of the new questions, because I'm gonna look at this again at the end of the session and hopefully then remember that it was the vacuum planetary mixer. And then final question: draw a sketch of the calendering process. Now, if I was reviewing that, I might quickly do a sketch on paper if I think this is a potential exam question, which for me it could have been, but you know your professors better what kind of questions they ask. Okay, we drew this and we thought, man, this was really hard. Like, we did it, but we would really like to review this as many times as possible still. So gonna go into the hard category, and then we end up with this question again, and we now finally remember that it was the vacuum planetary mixer, but because we had to review this twice, it definitely has to go into the hard category just to be sure. So I'm moving it into the hard category. Okay, and now we're gonna make a decision when we're gonna review this again, depending on when our exam is. So let's say our exam is in 2 days from now, so we are gonna do a few review sessions per day, right? So maybe I'm gonna do another one this evening, and then I'm gonna do another one tomorrow morning. And so the hard questions I'm gonna review both this evening, and then whatever still ends up being in the hard questions I'm gonna review again tomorrow morning. So later when I have reviewed this, I'm gonna update this. But these we're gonna look at the next time tomorrow morning, and then maybe these will be tomorrow afternoon, and you know, tomorrow evening, and the day after tomorrow. And I mean, I usually would put like the weekday there because tomorrow this is gonna be confusing if it says the day after tomorrow, but it's supposed to be tomorrow then. So yeah, But so let's say it is the day after tomorrow and all of the questions should hopefully by then be in this category, or maybe in one of the easy ones. It's okay if we don't get through all of these, like get them all to done. We just like as much as possible is the goal. And yeah, so we should all get them into the done category hopefully, and then we can be relatively sure that we know them. And again, I want to recommend using something like Anki. I'm not sponsored by them. I wish I got a sponsor, but you could see that I had to like move the slides around quite a bit, and it takes a lot longer than on Anki. You basically like you're shown one side of your virtual flashcard, and then you press the space bar to see the other side, and then you hit 1, 2, or 3 depending on if this was hard or not, and then it automatically shows it back to you in a time interval that you decided it should based on how hard you rated it. So that is so much less work than doing it all, you know, in slides, but I think from this you got a better idea of how this method actually works. If you found this helpful, you might also like my video on how to select the right study method for your exam. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye bye. Bye.